Alrighty, hello everyone. My name is Trundle Domination, and I am a top lane Trundle and Yorick main. Today, rather than my normal style of video where I do some gameplay commentary or some game explanation along with one of the games that I just played, I want to do a little more in-depth video on one really important league concept, which is tempo. So, as a little outline of this video, I'm going to go over what is tempo, first and foremost. Secondly, how to get a tempo advantage for yourself. Third, how to turn that tempo advantage into a permanent advantage in game. And four, how to easily apply these concepts individually in your solo queue or team reliant games. Alrighty. First off, what is tempo? Well, my personal definition is that tempo is how fast you're able to respond to a scenario on the map and not significantly damage your current advantageous states. Now that second part is really important, but we're going to go over that in a little bit. So we're going to focus on the first part of the prompt right now, which is limited by four key factors that I've identified. So I'm going to go move to the next slide. We're going to go a little more in depth on each of those four factors. So for movement speed, I've defined it as how fast you can physically get from one place to another on the map. And that literally means just like if you right click, what's the fastest way you can get there? And Riot will normally calculate that for you, obviously. So it just moves from point A to point B fast as you can. That's where movement speed comes in. So this is important because there are items that give you movement speed. Obviously, you can buy boots, you can use runes like celerity or water walking, and all of those will inherently increase your tempo capability or your capability to get a tempo advantage over your enemy. All right, secondly, enemy/your positioning is heavily reliant on pressure. And what I mean by that is if the enemy is able to isolate you away from a certain area of the map, you effectively lose tempo capability in that entire area. So a good example that I like to use to explain this concept is if you are a top lane, and I'm talking in reference because I'm a top lane main, and you're trying to make a roam play mid. If the enemy jungler is sitting in the river and stopping you or trying to fight you as you're trying to walk down to mid lane, that is effectively pressuring you away from that capability of tempo. And that's important mostly because it violates the second part of our definition, which we'll talk more about later. But basically, you'd be kind of giving up your current health and mana advantage in order to make that tempo play. And that's not a good factor when it comes to actually impacting fights. So enemy and your positioning are very important to consider on where you can actually impact on map. Vision control also plays a lot into this. I kind of played off the Zed quote here. I said the unseen route is the deadliest. So basically the route that you can't see, the route that's not lit up is generally the least safe to go because the enemies could be 5-stacked there, or they could have wards and be able to see you and counterplay your roam or your impact on that fight. So generally you want to try and follow the route that has vision, or if you're not scared of any enemies that could be there, you could still blow right through it. But it's really important to know what information you have and what you can actually see when it comes to getting from point A to B. As for objective status, it mostly comes into effect when it comes to trading objectives. So if you're trying to use your tempo advantage to impact a fight bot, you might actually want to flip the script and just not use your tempo advantage for that, but kind of switch it to another thing. So the best example would be if the enemies are all on Dragon, your tempo advantage might be better used to go and try to take Rift Herald or Baron with your team rather than trying to impact that kind of disadvantaged fight, if that makes sense. All right, let's move to the second half of the statement now, without losing any current advantageous state. So this means that you're not taking extensive risks to increase your tempo. And using our previous example of trying to roam down to mid lane, you would be losing your health and mana advantage. And that's a super important thing because it violates the value of your tempo. If you're losing one advantage to gain another, it's inherently risky. And that's what we really have to minimize when we're playing League of Legends is risk. Now, some might argue that risk is beneficial in some case if you're talking about either limit testing or you're talking about just kind of breaking the mold and being able to 1v9 games. And while that is very important, I think that I really want to emphasize calculated risk. Like just trying to roam mid, if the enemy jungler is right there and they're going to be able to take away your health and mana, it's just probably not worth it to go for that mid play, but rather maybe shift your attention to fighting that jungler, if that makes sense. So a lot of it is about trying to adapt to the current situation and trying to push your tempo advantage to do something that would not violate your other current advantages, if that makes sense. Okay, so moving on to the second thing, how can we actually gain a tempo advantage? Well, the first and foremost easiest way to actually gain the tempo advantage is to push in waves. So generally, how this works is if you're able to crash a stacked wave, and what I mean by stacked is that there's like 2 or 3 waves that are all kind of bunched together and you get them all under the enemy tower, that's the easiest way to gain a tempo advantage. Now this actually gets you a tempo advantage because the enemy is forced into a lose-lose situation. They either have to stay under tower, taking those minions, and let you get somewhere faster than them. You get the first move, is what they call it. Or they ditch the minions under the tower and they follow you, but they lose all of that golden experience. So either way, you will get a leg up, assuming that the fight that you're both rotating to has equal potential for success. So that's the easiest way to get a tempo advantage, is to push in waves so they're kind of forced to stay and get that XP rather than following you immediately, and you therefore are able to get somewhere quicker and be able to impact fights quicker. All right, the second way is about baiting enemies to a new location. I find this easiest with side laners, but it can be done with ADCs and supports. Basically, what you want to do is you want to, I guess it's easiest with an example. So let's say there's a team fight that's about to happen mid. So you want to be able to impact that fight, but you also know that maybe the enemy top laner is like 7-0, and they're like just to be able to destroy your whole team. So if you start a side lane push and you're able to bait that 7-0 top laner down to fight with you, then you are effectively able to force them to stay down there, and you get to run through Fog of War and probably impact that fight sooner. Additionally, what this also would do is just get that fed person out of your team fights, giving your team a better chance. So if you're able to bait the enemies away from the current fight, it can really give you a tempo advantage because you're able to get places quicker, especially if your champion is more mobile. All right, and the third and final way, I mean, there's more, but these are the 3 main ones that I want to highlight and the 3 easiest ones to apply. Killing enemies is a great way of getting a tempo advantage because obviously they cannot do anything if they're gray screened. They cannot respond to plays, they cannot move around the map, so killing them is a great way to gain this advantage. Now, what I will say is that you should not always try to just run around and play over aggressive in order just to get a small tempo advantage on somebody. You always have to consider other players and what they're doing and what they want to do. So just fair warning, don't think that you should run around killing everybody just to get this tempo advantage. All right, now when is tempo relevant? So what does it actually mean to get a tempo advantage? Well, in the early game, 9 times out of 10, this is going to be in skirmishes, which your brain-dead teammates just decided to engage in the river with no objective up for no reason, right? So tempo is relevant in this case because if you are the bot lane, I'm going to talk, because I'm playing a lot of bot lane recently in my Fill the Challenger series, so Fill the Diamond series, sorry. So I'm going to kind of talk through that lens for a minute. If we are bot lane, and we're able to shove that wave under tower and effectively gain that tempo advantage, then we can actually roam up the river to a dragon fight, or I guess if there's no dragon, just to a fight in the river faster than our enemy ADC would be because they have to farm under tower. So that's the easiest way in early game to actually use tempo to find an advantage because you're able to get first move over to another skirmish and help your team win it. In the mid to late game team fights, tempo often manifests itself through team fights, objective control, and vision control. So as for team fighting, it's kind of the same idea as the early game skirmishes, but you're able to, shove out waves, you're able to bait an enemy, and you're able to get to that team fight before your counterpart and be able to impact it more so than they are. As for objective control, like I said, it's kind of similar to these fights. Tempo is kind of a mixed in thing. Nothing's really separate from anything else. But for objective control specifically, if you're able to bait someone over to like Baron while your team takes Dragon, that can be a really good use of tempo advantage, or if you're able to impact the Dragon fight first. I think you guys kind of get that idea with my explanation so far. As for vision control, this is really important because along with early game skirmishes, they really decide game states. And what I mean by game state is just as it applies the current state of the game. So whether you are at an advantage, whether you're at a disadvantage, or whether you're kind of neutral, back and forth, whatever it is. So if you get a tempo advantage, like you're able to shove the wave or you're able to bait somebody and get somewhere first, you are often able to get vision control uncontested. And that makes these team fights and these skirmishes and these objective fights a lot easier to navigate. And that's why it's so important. Alrighty, so lastly, how can we actually apply this skill? Well, as I talked about before, we can use waves to pressure objectives. So the easiest way to do this would be for every objective that's about to come up in your games, you can start thinking, what lanes are right nearby this, and how can I push them in to gain that tempo advantage? So, for example, we can use Dragon, which would be mid lane and bot lane. So you can ping your allies to go to one lane while you go to the other. That's the easiest way to do it. And you would just be able to, let's say, shove in bot lane while your mid laner is able to go and shove in mid lane. That way, the enemies are forced to either lose that XP, like I said before, or they are forced to stay there and give you first move towards this objective fight. So that's the easiest way to actually apply this is just think if you're talking about Baron, you should be able to shove in top lane and mid lane. Those are your two priorities. Now, obviously, you should not leave a current fight to go shove in bot lane or shove in mid lane or shove in top lane, but you should be thinking about that maybe like a minute before Dragon spawns. Think about, where can I go to put pressure on the enemies and be able to get this objective a little better. And now the second way to apply this skill would be split pushing, which is a little bit more complex. I've explained the split pushing macro in my one Trundle top game, but I'll go through a little bit here. Essentially what you want to do is it's a combination of baiting enemies and pressuring waves. So if your whole team is going to Dragon, you might want to go top lane and split push. And obviously this is most applicable for mid lane and top lane who have champions that are kind of capable of that. But you want to be able to go top lane and split push if your whole team is on Dragon so that you can probably bait enemies up there so your team has a better chance in the fight. And you can also use this to take down towers and get yourself more gold. So that kind of that transitions pretty well into our third point, which is increasing income with jungle camps. So if you're able to get that tempo advantage, you can use it to come over and take the enemy jungle camps. You probably don't want to take your own junglers camps unless they're not going to tilt at you. You're able to go take these camps and get yourself further ahead. And in the case of split pushing, you'd be taking turrets and extra minion waves. So you can use tempo to get yourself a gold advantage a lot of the time. So that is the end of my explanation on tempo. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have about tempo, how you can use it, how it's relevant, all the aspects of this video. Also, let me know if you want another concept covered. If there's a specific one you want me to try and cover, similar format, I'm going to go a little more in depth, I think, next time. With actually using examples and gameplay examples along with that commentary and kind of mix my two style of videos. That's what I'm hoping for. But yeah, let me know if there's any other concepts that you want me to cover and explain for you guys. And thank you for watching and have a great day.